Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 8 stories, from tales of haunted houses, rules, and just the strange and bizarre. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Sleeping in my bed always used to make me itchy. It was an annoyingly predictable cycle. I would fall asleep with an odd, tickling sensation on my skin, one that would vanish when I rubbed at the spot, and when I woke up, my arms and legs would be crazy itchy, almost burning. I once sat in the bathroom for almost 30 minutes, looking over my skin with a hand mirror, my butt slowly going numb, obsessively examining every spot, but there was nothing I could pinpoint. My dad scoffed at my problem. He was frustratingly skeptical of just about everything, and every time I complained to him, he would shrug it off and suggest another fruitless solution I had already tried. Truth be told, I think he just hated hearing anything bad about the house. It has been in his family for generations, and he was always reticent to change anything about it. I sometimes wondered if my bed had been in the family for generations too. It creaked if you so much as looked at it, and had all sorts of lumpy spots. And it smelled permanently musty, no matter how much air freshener I hosed it down with, or how many times I washed the sheets. It rubbed off onto my skin, oozed onto my pores. My friends always joked that I smelled like their grandparents' houses. At first I thought it might just be something weird with my skin. But then one time, my cousins came to visit. One got my bed and I was banished to the couch. At first I was upset, but that visit was the first time I could remember that my skin didn't itch when I woke up. The morning that my cousins were leaving, I approached the one that had slept in my bed. "Hey, did you sleep alright in my room?" "Yeah," she said. "I slept fine." "And no weird reactions?" She cocked her head. Now that I think about it, I woke up really itchy. "Oh?" "Yeah." She brushed a hand over her bare arm. It felt like something was tickling me just as I was falling asleep. Once I turned on the lights and checked the bed, but I didn't see anything. Well, probably nothing. "Probably?" "Yeah, I mean, I might have." She trailed off, then shook her head. "No, nothing." So it was the bed. It was the damned bed. I begged my dad to replace it, but he always refused. Why replace a perfectly good bed? He'd ask me. So I slathered my skin in anti-itch cream, tried not to scratch myself raw, and got on with my life. One day, though, I had had enough. When my parents weren't home, I attempted to break the bed. I jumped up and down on it as high as I could, feeling like a giant 5-year-old, sure that my dad would have to replace a broken bed. But as I stopped and rested for a moment, a sharp pain shot into my foot. Like a needle jamming into my leg. I cried and fell onto the bed, clutching my foot. The spot was bleeding lightly. I must have jammed a box spring into my leg or something. I looked down at the spot I had jumped on. It wasn't hard to spot. There was a small splotch of blood there, and I could see the spring sticking up, a little black speck. I lightly touched the spot, wondering if I could push it back down. Then it moved. Beneath my finger, it slid back under the surface without any pressure on my part. I thought I must have felt the skittering movement of something, like a sea creature returning to the depths. I scrambled back and re-examined the spot. Nothing. Just my blood now. I swallowed hard and tried to rationalize. The spring must have just sprung back into shape, right? Yeah, that sounded realistic. My foot had already stopped bleeding. I decided I was done with this endeavor and left the room, unable to stop my skin from crawling. That night the tingling was worse than before. I tossed and turned, certain I had angered the spirit of this accursed bed, and then the pain began. This was nothing like before. It was like pins were stabbing me all over my body. I flung my blanket aside and leaped up, fleeing down the stairs and waking my parents. And when my dad flipped on the lights, demanding to know what was happening, I saw it. My skin was covered in strange black smears and painful bumps. I tried to talk, but all I could do was cry. My skin burned so bad. Even my father could not think of a good way to explain this. I ended up in the shower for ages, trying to cool my angry skin with icy water. The one good thing to come out of this incident was that I was finally getting a new mattress. My parents took me to buy one the very next evening. I was elated. It was dead simple. My dad picked one out, we strapped it to the roof of the car and drove home. I helped haul it up to my room, squeezing it through the narrow door. I glared down the horrible old mattress that had tormented me for so long and scratched idly at the bumps still on my skin. "All right," my dad said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get moving." We heaved the mattress out of the bed frame, and it hit the ground upside down with a thump. I could see that the bottom had a sheet of gauze covering it. The staples holding it in place rusted almost to nothingness. To this day, I have no idea what possessed me to do this. Maybe, looking down at the bed, seemingly defeated, I wanted to see what had allowed it to torment me for so long. Maybe it was a childish instinct to harm it in some way. But I reached down and tugged at the gauze. It came away easily, and at first, I did not quite understand what my eyes were seeing. The inside was coated in a fuzzy black and white substance. Mold, I thought. Of course it was mold. But then the mass moved and I realized in horror what it really was. Spiders. Hundreds and hundreds of huge pitch black spiders and their fuzzy white egg sacs. They began to swarm out of the old mattress like flies deserting a rotting corpse. I screamed and leaped onto the side table, but it was no use. They crawled onto my bare legs, biting, and I desperately tried to shake them off. My dad tried to stomp on them, but there were just too many. They coated the floor almost as thick as carpet. Finally, he sprang across the room and hefted me over his shoulder. He stampeded down the stairs, ran out the back, and leapt into the pool, mercifully ending their attack. As we surfaced, I could see them floating on the surface of the water, either curled up and twitching in their death spasms, or skittering away on the surface to elsewhere. We called an exterminator, insisting they had to come that day. The whole house was fumigated while we stayed in a hotel, and I tried not to twitch in my bed, desperately trying to reassure myself that I was just imagining tiny legs tickling my skin. Before the exterminators left for good, I asked if they had ever seen anything like this before. "Once," one said, scratching at his salt and pepper stubble. "Not as bad as this, but I've seen it." "Really?" "Yeah. Another old box spring." He chuckled. "Makes you wonder what's really under people's beds." Makes you wonder indeed. There's this Facebook group where people who live in my city can sell stuff, ask questions to each other, trash talk the mayor. You get it. I was scrolling through it when I saw a post about something I'd never heard of before. "What do you guys know about this house? It's by the side of the road a few miles out of town." I was looking for a nice place for a photo shoot when I found it. There's 2 statues near it, but you can only see them if you go around the house. I called them marble twins in my pictures. I got this weird feeling after some time, so I got the hell out of there. Check it out. The guy had posted some pictures. The first one showed the house from the road. Vegetation covered most of the brick walls. The windows were broken and the roof had collapsed. The second and third ones showed the statues he had talked about. The first marble twin was a shouting woman, looking up at something and raising a crucifix in front of her. The second one was a weeping woman, kneeling in front of the woman and holding a knife while crossing his hands as if he was praying. My best friend, Luke, likes those weird things. He's the one who introduced me to you guys, by the way. So I tagged him in that post and forgot about it for a few hours. He called me just before lunch. Dude, we gotta go there. He said. Hi, Luke. Oh, yeah, hi. Let's go see that house, man. I'm having lunch right now, and I can't drive until next month. You should know that. It's your fault. Come on, I'll pick you up. You better take something to eat. And you blame genetics? I'm getting in shape. Hell yeah, you are. A spheric shape. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The place gave me the creeps. The closer we got to the house, the more out of place everything seemed, including myself. The wind got louder, and everything else was just silent. I felt something nauseating while Luke drove towards the house. It looked as if it got closer than it should with each second. We got out of the car. The brick walls stretched across most of my field of vision when I stopped and looked back. The road shouldn't be that far away from us. I'm feeling a bit sick, man. I don't think we should be here. I said. Don't chicken out now. Let's just see the statues. We walked around the house, and there stood the marble twins. Well, at least one of them stood. The guy was still kneeling. I noticed their bases on the ground. There was something written in small letters in front of them. I crouched so I could read better. She's called the Saint, I said. Look at his base. Oh, I see. This one's the sinner, Luke said, kneeling on the grass. Looking at them made me feel guilty. I felt like some sort of sick voyeur. You have to see this, Luke said. What? If you look really close, you can see that there's fear in her eyes too, and that there's anger in the guy's eyes too. I wonder why someone would just bring them here. Maybe it's some sort of yin-yang thing, the duality of mankind or something like that. Maybe the isolation is part of the art. I don't know. Can we go now? Alright, chicken. I'll come back here without you. Luke called me again on Friday morning. Hey, is it okay if I tell my parents that I'm going to sleep at your house tonight? Sure. Why? I'll tell you later. Fine. But if you fuck up, I'm going to say you lied to me. Okay. That night he sent me some pictures. He had gone to the marble twins' house. He was drinking near the statues. He had placed a beer bottle over the kneeling man's head and a sleeping mask over the shouting woman's eyes. I like her the most, he wrote in a message. She's a bit cold, but you get used to it. I wish she was the one kneeling, though. The wind coming through my window got louder. My parents were watching TV downstairs, and I couldn't hear the movie anymore. Just be careful, I told him. I messaged him on the next morning. He didn't answer. I tried calling him, but it went straight into voicemail. I knew something was wrong. My dad was having breakfast. I ran to him. Jesus, what happened? He said. I think Luke's in danger. Can you drive me? He's just out of town. Alright, calm down. Where is it? It's by the road. Okay, I'll take you there. Let's go. I told my dad about the place and Luke's stupid idea of spending the night there while he took me to the house. This time, it seemed as if we would never get to it. I could barely spot it from the road. It was smaller than I remembered. I see it. There it is, I told my father. My father turned to drive us through the grass, and as soon as we got off the road, the car got stuck. I opened the door and jumped out. Wait for me, my father said. I ran as fast as I could. I had to stop and gasp for air, but the house still appeared to be as far as it was when I got off the car. I put my hands over my knees and looked at my feet until the black dots disappeared from my sight. Then a shadow fell over me. I looked up and the brick wall was inches away from my face, almost touching my nose. I walked around the house and fell on my knees. There were the statues. The saint still shouted and raised her crucifix. The sinner still kneeled and prayed while holding a knife. My father got around the house and stopped beside me. "Didn't you say there were two of them?" The fool completed the triangle, blindfolded and holding a bottle. It all started about a month ago, after I'd moved into my new rental house. I was in my living room, reclining on my thrift store couch while surfing the web. I happened to glance at the floor for a split second and saw it. A small bulge in the center of the living room rug, about the size of an apple. The room was an ugly thing. A circular wool affair about 10 feet in diameter and a deep yellow in color. I don't mean a happy shade like sunshine or lemon. This was a festering, nauseous, putrid yellow. The kind of yellow you'd see in the pus that forms around a grievous open wound, or in a stagnant puddle of piss in an unflushed gas station bathroom. I don't know how anyone could have looked at that thing and thought, "Yeah, I want this rug in my home." The only reason I'd kept it was because it was one of the few furnishings the house had come with, and I needed something to cover the scuffed wood paneling of the living room floor. Frowning, I got up and pressed the bulge down, feeling my toes hit the floor underneath. I ran my foot across the rug, the wool fibers brushing the sole of my foot as I searched for anything that might have caused the bulge. Nothing. Must have been an air pocket, I said to myself. Shrugging, I plopped down on the couch and went back to what I was doing. Before long, I'd completely forgotten about the bulge. 2 weeks passed, and it happened again. I had just gotten home from a grueling shift at work and was in the process of hanging up my coat when I saw it. The bulge was back, in the exact same spot as before, only now it was the size of a grapefruit. Frowning, I walked over to the rug and pressed my heel against the bulge. As it sank down, I felt something shift beneath my foot, accompanied by a brief sound like a wet gurgle. I jumped back with a start. I stood there for a good minute staring at the now flat rug, feeling my heart hammer in my ears. Finally, I knelt down and lifted the rug. Only the hardwood floor greeted me. I felt around for any kind of hole or hidden door or anything that could account for whatever created the bulge. Nothing. It was just another air pocket, I told myself as I put the rug back. Just an air pocket. That's all. And that gurgle I heard was probably just something in the pipes that ran under the house. Yeah, that was it. Satisfied with my explanation, I fixed myself dinner and went to bed. As I lay there in the dark waiting to drift off to sleep, I tried to ignore the faint gurgling coming from my living room. I stayed out of the living room from then on out, only passing through when I got home from work, or when I needed to get from my bedroom to the kitchen. Each time I walked through, I kept my eyes on the rug, watching for the bulge and listening for a gurgle. When 2 weeks passed without incident, I felt my anxiety slowly draining away. Then one morning, I awoke from a restless slumber. As I walked out of the hallway into the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling my blood turn to ice. The bulge was back. This time it was the size of a large dog, so big that it threatened to tip over the couch that sat on the edge of the rug. From beneath I heard that distinctive gurgling sound. I didn't dare move. I stood motionless for several minutes, paralyzed by dread. The rational part of my brain tried telling me I had to be imagining this, but it was drowned out by my primal instinct screaming at me to run. "What are you?" I finally whispered. The bulge shifted in my direction. I screamed as I turned on my heels and bolted back to my bedroom. I slammed the door shut behind me and pushed my bed up against it. I sat down with my back against the wall and my head in my hands. My heart hammered in my ribcage as I took several deep breaths, desperately trying to rationalize what was happening. I'm crazy, I said to myself. I found myself nodding frantically. Yeah, that had to be it. Clearly I'd suffered from some sort of psychotic breakdown and was hallucinating that there was some kind of horrible monster under my living room rug. It was the only explanation that made sense. But how could I convince myself that I was just imagining things? Because going out and lifting up the rug myself was out of the question. My shattered mind would surely conjure up another hallucination. No. What I needed was a third party. Someone to confirm the bulge wasn't really there, that it was just a product of my delirious mind. Whipping out my phone, I sent a text to my landlord, Martin. Hey man, got a problem. Pipes are backed up and the toilet is overflowing. The reply came a few minutes later. Well shit. Hang on, I'll be right there. Satisfied, I put the phone away and leaned back against the wall to wait, ignoring that horrid gurgling from down the hall. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. I pushed my bed aside and crept out into the hall, staying low to the ground. Peeking around the corner into the living room, I saw the bulge under my carpet was still there, waiting. That damned gurgling assaulted my ears. The handle of my front door jiggled as my landlord let himself in. Martin was a portly man in his 50s with a mop of greasy black hair and a thick caterpillar mustache. A tool belt hung off his waist as he stepped over the threshold. This was it. Martin would clearly see that there was no bulge, that it was all in my head. I'd probably have to see a doctor right away, get professional help, maybe even spend time in an institution. I'd worry about that later though. Right now I needed to see Martin walk right past the rug like the bulge wasn't even there. Which it wasn't, obviously. Alright, I'm here, Martin called as he shut the door behind him. Where are... His voice trailed off. I felt my heart sink as his eyes settled directly on the rug, on the bulge. The gurgling sound came again, making me flinch. Martin clearly heard it too, from the way his brow furrowed in confusion. He saw it. He heard it. What the hell? He muttered as he approached the rug. Hey, you under there, kid? This some kind of prank? 'Cause I don't get it. The bulge shifted slightly towards him. I wanted to jump out, scream at him to get away, but again I found myself paralyzed by fear. Frowning, Martin dropped to one knee, kneeling close to the floor as he lifted the edge of the rug. For a split second I saw his face change. Confusion was replaced by stark terror. Then he was yanked under the rug, vanishing beneath the diseased yellow. Martin screamed, a primal sound of horror and pain, his legs flailing wildly as he was pulled under. Gurgling filled the air, and Martin's scream was abruptly cut off by a new sound. A horrible cacophony of violent crunching and wet ripping. And just as quickly as it started, it was over. The living room was silent as a grave, the rug laying flat on the floor. I stood up slowly, pulse racing and body coated in sweat. I forced myself to step around the couch and kneel beside the rug. My hands were shaking as my fingers gripped the edge of the rug, whipping it up in one swift motion. Just a normal floor. No trace of a monster, nor of Martin. Just a floor. I numbly set the carpet back down and returned to my room, locking the door behind me. From behind me, I heard a brief gurgle. That was a day ago. I haven't slept, haven't eaten. As I type up this account on my phone with trembling hands, My bloodshot eyes keep wandering to the missed call notifications. Calls from work, probably wondering why I haven't showed up. Calls from Martin's wife, no doubt wondering where he is. I've only set foot outside my room once, to quickly use the bathroom when the pressure of holding it in became too much. As I bolted back to the bedroom, I stole a quick glance down the hall. There's an enormous shadow on the living room wall, the size of a car. Gurgling fills the air. The thing under the rug is back. I'd like to share something that happened to me a long time ago. I was 11 at the time, so 14 years ago. I had a friend. I can't seem to bring myself to type out his name. Let's just call him Johnny. We were just normal suburban kids, doing kid things, playing games in the streets, climbing trees, riding our bikes, being pretty mundane overall. Like most kids, we had a lot of fun. But also, like most kids, we got bored. I think that every little suburb like ours probably has at least one creepy old house. Maybe it was abandoned. Maybe it was a gathering place for vagrants. Or maybe it was inhabited by a dusty, grouchy old lady who everyone joked was some kind of witch. But it was always there. The token house at the end of the street. We had one too. These houses accumulate stories like moss, and ours was no different. Most of the stories that went around the schoolyard about this house were that it was haunted. Again, kinda mundane. Kids would claim that they saw a shadowy figure in the window, or that they broke in and heard all kinds of sounds. Saw full-bodied ghosts. I had never experienced anything particularly haunting about the house. But I acknowledged that it was creepy and did buy into the tales. I'm sure you can see where this is going, but bear with me. This is no normal ghost story. One comfortable fall day, Johnny and I were walking along the edge of the forest. I say forest, but it was really just a strip of trees that separated our neighborhood from the highway, as we often did between activities. If I remember correctly, I think we were running across the street in front of moving cars, or at least something equally as stupid. Hey, don't look at me like that. Anyway, we had been doing that for a long while. Maybe it was the adrenaline that spurred on the thought, but that was when Johnny broached the subject. Hey, we should totally explore that old house on Marcus Street. I've been wanting to go for a while, so every time I pass by it, I've been looking for a way in. There's a part on the fence that you can bend up to get in. As I'd been curious about the place too, I was all over the idea. We made plans to go for it the following weekend so that we had time to prepare, as if we were going on a long expedition that we may never return from. We planned out and picked up a few things like flashlights and snacks. That weekend, we met by the house and made our entry. The house is etched into my memory. It was dilapidated. It had been uninhabited for as long as I could remember. The yard was overgrown, with weeds reaching up to 3 feet tall. The chain-link fence was bent and rusty. There was a gated driveway, pocked with potholes and crumbling asphalt, leading up to a garage with a half-collapsed roof. Shingles and litter could be spotted through the grass strewn about the yard. The paint was peeling and discolored, and it had faded to a dull and dirty yellow where there was still color to be seen. Vines had grown up the left side of the building to the second story. Johnny led me through the right side of the house to a section of fencing that had started to warp upward in the bottom corner. He pulled it up, revealing a space just big enough for us to crawl through without getting scratched up by the jagged edge. And I led the way in. To our right, the alley between the house and the fence was so choked with grass and garbage that we wouldn't have even tried to pass through. So we headed to the left toward the front. The railing on one side of the stoop had broken off at the bottom of the stairs and was hanging on by a thread at the top as it bent off to hang in the air. The front door was painted white where it hadn't peeled off. At the bottom, there was a small, triangular piece of the door missing where some critter had probably gnawed its way in. Our excitement was definitely at a high as we approached the door. I was leading the way, and at the top of the stairs I reached out and grasped the doorknob. I went to turn it, but it was stuck. I had to grab it with both hands and push my weight against it, but the door did pop open with the cracking sound of warped wood and a shower of dust. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath while I batted the dust away, and when I opened my eyes again, we had taken a few steps inside. It was pretty dark, but there was enough light filtering through the windows and the cracks in the walls that we didn't really need the flashlights to see, but we held them at the ready all the same. I remember that the first thing I noticed, other than the lighting, was how quiet it was. It's hard to describe. It was strange. It wasn't so much that we couldn't hear cars or birds or the usual neighborhood sounds, but more that there was a lack of any ambient sound at all. Like there was a void where all this sound normally was. The kind of feeling you get when you step into a room to get away from a party and close the door behind you. Usually there's a kind of relief when that quiet washes over you, but that space was filled with something else, something uncomfortable. We took a minute to soak in the atmosphere and look around. There was dust, cobwebs, old wood. I'm not sure what I was expecting from an old house, but I remember being a little disappointed. It's quiet, Johnny's son, his voice dropping down to a whisper between the two words, as if he cringed at how loud his normal speaking voice was. I just nodded in response. I had such a profound feeling that speaking would be wrong here that my throat just kind of closed up. He walked around the house quietly, occasionally whipping out the flashlights to illuminate a dark corner or examine the detail on an old piece of wooden furniture. There was a lot to take in. While most of the small home goods seemed to be taken, either by the previous owner or other would-be explorers before us, it seemed like none of the furniture had been removed, giving the home an eerie, unnaturally empty feel. In addition to that, the furniture that was left, while covered in dust, dirt, and cobwebs, was surprisingly nice to look at. I could tell that this place would have been pretty classy in its own time. As interesting as all that was, though, our place was pretty uneventful. Other than feeling ill at ease, we hadn't experienced anything that we would consider supernatural. No ghostly shapes, no floating objects, no whispers in our ears, just that looming silence. We had made our way around the first floor, climbed the creaky old stairs to the second, and poked our heads into what were probably a couple bedrooms when something finally caught our attention. At the end of the hallway, we had come to the last door on the left. When Johnny turned the knob, it swung open, smooth and silent, and as we got our first glance into this completely barren room, something washed over us. Not a gust of wind or a cloud of dust, but more like an intangible torrent of feeling. At the time, I didn't notice anything more than the sting of tears in my eyes. It was only thinking back on it later that the swell of emotion seemed so dense, a whole suitcase of feelings to unpack. Then, quick as the malaise had come, it passed. We stood there for a moment, conflicted now that we found ourselves face to face with something that we both could sense was beyond the natural. But that was what we had come for, so we tentatively stepped inside and looked around. There wasn't much to see. Like the other rooms upstairs, it was barren save for the dust and cobwebs, but this one did have a closet door in the corner. We went to it and opened it to see something surprising. A light switch, right in the center of the back wall of the closet. We were drawn to it, and everything inside my body told me to leave, stop, go somewhere else, anywhere else. but I was no longer in control of my body, and I don't think Johnny could stop himself either. He cupped his hand and turned it so that the side of his finger came up and touched the underside of the switch, and I watched as he flicked his wrist and the switch clicked on to the on position. All hell broke loose. There was an eruption of noise, a cacophony so loud that I couldn't tell if it was erupting inside my head or crashing down all around me. My mind immediately clouded over, and I felt as if I had been reading non-stop for days on end. Fatigue seared through my body and I collapsed into a ball on the ground, commanding, begging my numb arms to press my hands to my ears. My eyes squeezed shut, but it didn't stop all the colors from flashing rapidly before my vision. I was losing my mind. Gradually, my senses started to, make sense of things. The flashing colors turned into shapes, features, faces, words, and objects. The sounds became shrieks, screams, garbled voices, saying words that were too numerous to distinguish from one another. Raw emotion became anger, sadness, joy, hate, betrayal, loss, relief, confusion. My mind grabbed onto that word, and I heard my own mental voice saying it over and over again. The familiarity of my own thoughts drew me towards them. Ironically, that word helped me cling to sanity. I felt myself anchored, remembered that the wooden floorboards were beneath me. I felt them there under my knees, and suddenly my body was my own again. I opened my eyes, saw Johnny on the floor next to me. I told my arm to reach out for him, and this time, it listened. When I touched his sleeve, I could see the entire weave of the fabric in my hand. I saw the whole pattern design as it regressed through its stages of development. Threads being pulled this way and that, the dye undoing itself, a bath of cold water, a man's hand, a man's mind as it transferred the image to paper with a pencil. I pulled myself away. I felt as though I could have kept going like that, witnessed the entire making of the world as we know it. Fortunately, I had the sense to stop myself from going down that rabbit hole. I don't think I would have come back. Pushing those thoughts aside, I grabbed Johnny's shirt sleeve and pulled. We fell on top of each other, but that seemed to help the both of us. As we started scrambling to our feet and out of the closet, one thing that added to the surrealness was that I still couldn't hear anything over what I can only assume was the wailing souls of the damned or something. I could feel my hands and feet connecting with the ground, but there was no audio feedback. We fell over each other out of the closet and began to get up, only to witness even more maddening horror. On my hands and knees, I picked my head up and saw flickering lights and colors. Instinctively, I squeezed my eyes shut against the scene, light still dancing on the inside of my eyelids. I sat for a moment, hardening my thoughts against this new invasion into my senses, and then I forced my eyes to open and look again. Trying to blink my way through the bleariness and gritting my teeth, the colors and lights took on a slightly more intelligible shape. There were creatures, shadows and silhouettes all over the room. Some had limbs that made me think they may be, or may have been humanoid, but others were just vague shapes, tall and skinny and rounded at the top. They were all moving rapidly, erratically, it almost takes away from the horror of it all, but in retrospect, just to give you all something to visualize, they were kind of like those wacky inflatable flailing tube decorations. Silly as that may sound, to me at that moment, it was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. Completely surrounded, inundated with those flailing creatures. They filled my vision, and moving my head made me nauseous. I looked around wildly, searching for my friend, and I saw him next to me, getting himself to his feet. A beacon of sanity in this world gone mad. Inspired, I started to stand up, and he reached down to help me. When we found our footing, we started running for the exit, clutching onto each other. It wasn't just that room, it was the whole house. We stepped out into the hallway and were greeted with those same creatures, flickering and seizing, twitching and leaping around. They were everywhere. They filled every inch of the dead space in the house, overlapping with each other and with us. We plowed through their incorporeal forms and ran down the hallway, then down the stairs. As we hit the bottom of the stairs, I started reaching out for the front door only a few more steps away, and realized that I didn't have Johnny in my grasp anymore. Still deafened? I didn't hear it so much as feel it, but something happened behind me and I spun around to see that he had tripped on one of the last steps. He was sprawled out on the floor, picking his head up and looking to me. I try to believe that I thought I could, I don't know, throw the door open and pull him through. I don't know why that was my priority just then. I was just a kid. Maybe I was so scared that for a moment I only cared about myself. Maybe all the sensory overload was too much and impacted my decision-making. Whatever decision-making skills an 11-year-old may have. Maybe I thought that I could only save myself. Whatever the reason, seeing Johnny on the floor like that, I turned away. I took the last 2 steps to the front door and threw it open. I turned back and he was still there, shadows and silhouettes surrounding him, dancing in the background like some kind of rave, leaning over him and tumbling over one another, lurching their way between the two of us, making it that much harder for me to go back. I hesitated there on the threshold. I don't know for how long. My body was locked up. My mind was at war with itself. I don't know if it was my sense of self-preservation or one of those things in that house that did it, but something shoved me out the door, and all too suddenly, I was in control again. My legs forgot how to work, and I tumbled down the stone steps into the front yard and scrambled my way backwards through the tall grass. While I looked on in horror, the door slammed shut with a resounding bang. As I sat, hyperventilating against the fence on the far side of the front yard, my normal senses started coming out from wherever they had hidden. The cold air blew gently across my face. The sun in the bright blue sky was so radiant. My hands dug into the soft dirt to my sides, filling my fists with soil. I swallowed, tasting bitter panic and bile. I took a breath and the smell of grass filled my nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter chopped away at the air. An echo of the colors and creatures still danced behind my eyelids. My ears still rang from the din and clangor of that other world. I still saw Johnny's face, his hand reaching out to me. No, I didn't. Something was wrong. Before my mind's very eye, I watched as his face blurred out of focus. His features melted away. I tried to think of his hair color, and just like that, it was gone. His clothes had colors, and then they didn't. He had no clothes. He had no body to put clothes on. All that was left were his shoes. Now they were gone too. His name. What was his name? I have a confession to make. I witnessed my best friend's undoing that day. I don't call him Johnny because I can't bring myself to say his name. I do it because he doesn't have one. He did. I know he did. He must have existed, I think. I didn't go into that house alone. That, at least, I remember. Someone was there with me, and now they aren't. Every memory I have of something I did with them, there's just a blur. I can just as easily remember them happening with me, alone. No one came to ask me about what happened to my friend. Did their parents forget them too? The school? Certainly we went to school together. Probably even sat next to each other. I remember we were close, but there was no trace of them. No empty seats. No missing posters. No questions. I went home and the world just closed up over the hole where there had been. Now that hole only exists in my memory. A scab. A silhouette of a person. "2 years ago, my parents decided to move away from the bustling city I grew up in to the outskirts of a rural town. It was a big move for me, leaving our little apartment, my friends, hell, basically everything I knew. It didn't help that the new house wasn't so new. My father spent more time promising to fix things than he actually did, and I eventually got used to the toilet that stuck, the weak spots on the stairs, and the back door that never seemed to latch properly. What I still haven't adjusted to is the silence, the isolation. Most of my friends are online, and when I take off my headphones late at night after a gaming session, the quiet hits me like a force. It's thick, undulated silence. I grew up with the constant hum of cars, appliances, voices filtering through our walls. Here my room is far away, enough from my parents that I can't ever hear them anymore, which I'm mostly grateful for. Any noise that breaks that silence seems amplified. I've caught myself jumping when my cat Tiggs pushes his way into my room, making the door squeal on its hinges. I've heard the floorboards creak like someone's walking over them when I know I'm alone in the house. It's an old house. It's normal, right? Basically, all of this is just to say, I know I'm already a little paranoid and on edge. I know what I saw is probably nothing, but I'm not sure. 3 nights ago, around 2 in the morning, I finished off a match and logged off for the night. Drank the last of my soda, got up from the computer and walked a few steps to my bed. There's a window between my desk and bed that looks onto the back of our property. Scruffy grass that runs to woods at its boundary. I've heard foxes scream, what I assume was a cougar yowl, and the occasional stray dog or two when they came too close to the house, and Ranger, our German Shepherd, caught wind and went ballistic. They scared the hell out of me when they happened, but I knew what they were. I went to roll my blind down so I could sleep late again, and glanced out as I did so. At first I thought it was the reflection of something in my room. The lights from my PC, maybe. It wasn't a reflection, though. It was out there, in the woods, in the pitch black trees, like pairs of flashlights. Absent the beam of light. Little bright pinpricks, at least a dozen. I could have maybe believed it was some of our distant neighbors looking for a pet or some towny kid sneaking out to drink somewhere, but you know when you see a cat's eye in the dark, how it picks up the lights and gives this almost iridescent dished reflection? Or when you go out at night and startle a mass of raccoons, you feel those glowing eyes on you? That's what it felt like. Like these weren't dead beams of light, but biological, living. I felt watched. The paired lights, the eyes seemed to flicker and bob slightly, which only made me more sure it was from something moving. Someone moving. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I released it, scared to break the heavier than ever silence in the room. Tiggs slept on my bed unaware. I squinted and pressed my face against the glass, hoping for a clearer look, hoping my initial feelings were wrong. I was just spooking myself like usual. I just about had a fucking heart attack when Ranger sounded off, his booming bark cutting through the night. I looked closer to the house, but I couldn't see him. Clouds covered the night sky and there were no streetlights for miles. What I did saw just freaked me out even more. Scattered pairs of those eyes amongst the grass, the closest only 100 yards or so off the house. I felt my blood run cold, paralyzed against the window. I just about crapped my pants when Tiggs decided to do a yowl, yawn, and thump onto the ground. I turned my head so fast, I might have broken the sound barrier. Tiggs seemed completely unaware, stretching and padding towards me, rubbing up against my legs. When I looked out again, the clouds had broken, and the eyes, lights, whatever, were gone. But the grass in the backyard was swaying, like something had passed through it, quickly. I didn't get to sleep for another few hours. I dropped my blind, gathered Tiggs up, and burrowed into my bed, trying to reassure myself. And I'm sure there's a rational answer for what it was. Fireflies, maybe? My overtired brain used to spotting enemies in games. A raccoon horde, even. What I don't understand is, there was no light. There was nothing to reflect off those eyes. They didn't cast a beam. They moved. They glowed. Whatever answer I come up with doesn't fit properly, and that scares me. I haven't lifted my blind since. I just have this unease that to even look out would somehow invite them back. I guess I just need someone to tell me that I'm being superstitious, overreacting, anything. I need someone to give me an answer. Back in October of last year, I applied for a job as a hotel bellboy, and the interview came with some peculiar rules. I'd been laid off in August like many others, and this opening came up in passing during a conversation at a bar. I was camping on a college friend's couch at 22. We decided to meet his girlfriend to get out of the house and have a drink with her old sorority sisters. The term outdoor and 50% capacity had been stretched to its limit in Hoboken. The only real change since the pandemic was that no one could sit at the bar, and they put less tables on the floor, meaning seating was cramped. That's how I met Catherine. In the commotion, my group rushed to find seats with some friends we already knew. Catherine had been talking to my friend Jill when everyone scrambled to make room for us, and she hesitated to move during the seating shuffle. When everyone was settled, my roommate had stolen Jill away to another table, and Catherine was trapped with us. Catherine was a pretty blonde girl with big brown eyes and definitely one of Jill's sorority sisters. Well, conversation kicked up for our group. Catherine was quiet, obviously feeling kind of awkward and excluded. I guess she only really knew Jill, so I struck up a conversation with her to be polite. Of course, there's a limited number of topics near strangers are comfortable having with each other at first. Inevitably, I asked her what she did for a living. I work at the Magnum. She said as if I'd know what that was. To be fair, most of my friends who've taken up business degrees and gotten jobs as analysts of some kind answer the question the same way. My biology major didn't lend itself to company names. When I asked, she explained it was a luxury hotel in the city. I thought hotels weren't doing so well right now, I said. It's the type of place with clients rich enough to rent out floors for 6 weeks, Catherine explained. We kind of don't worry about rotating traffic. Pays well, tips are pretty good too. Biggest problem is the short staff since, you know. The giant unemployment elephant in the room, all us young workers refused to acknowledge, hovered wordlessly between us. I spent the rest of the night talking to her about hockey, latching onto the fact that she was a Devils fan. I didn't really get desperate enough to consider hotel service until a month later when my already pathetic savings had dwindled to almost nothing, and none of my other prospects had panned out in my field. I was staring down at my last can of tuna and, though Brian hadn't asked, I knew I should be paying rent or moving out by now. I wasn't going to move in with my asshole dad, and my mom just sold her house to pay for her own hospital expenses. Money, any money, would do. I decided to take a chance and text Catherine, hoping she wouldn't be offended that this was the first time I was reaching out to her since we met. I got an automatic message back that I was texting a landline. I half assumed then that she gave me a fake number, one off from her cell or something. Part of me found that amusing. I called it, half expecting an automatic machine to tell me it'd connect me to the moon in the rejection system. This would be a funny little anecdote to tell Jill if that was the case, and maybe, A little concerning for my social skills, but no. 2 rings in, Catherine picked up. Hello? Oh, hi, I said, stilted, shocked she was actually on the other side. Catherine? This is Catherine, right? Right about then I realized I didn't remember her last name. From the bar the other night for Jill Delaney's sorority sister reunion. It's Jessie, by the way. Smooth as sandpaper. Yeah, I remember. You were right over there, Jessie? Yeah, I just didn't expect you to answer a landline. Right, she said sheepishly. I forgot that. They don't really let us use cell phones here, so I kind of fell into the habit of giving out people my work phone. Sorry. You can call me Kat, by the way. Kat, okay. You're working? I can call back, or you can call me back, or... I heard myself making a bigger deal out of a simple question than it should be. I had a question about your job. If you were still hiring, I mean, the Magnum, like, if it was still hiring. I was listening to myself nervously rattle off nonsense, wondering why I wasn't dropping dead from mortification yet. Somehow, after that mess, Catherine didn't immediately hang up. She even told me she'd asked the manager about potential openings. I didn't hear anything for 2 days after that, and had almost forgotten about it when my friend Brian dropped a manila envelope on my lap. It was addressed to me, though I usually had my mail forwarded to my mom's in South Jersey. But there it was. When I opened it, there was a little introductory letter to me in type and textured paper. Dear Jessie Faw, your interest in joining the Magnum's hospital team, we have been referred your information and believe that it may fit the goals of our hotel. We would like to extend an invitation to conduct a formal interview and further discuss your skills and qualifications in relation to further opportunities. Please arrive at the following address at no later than 10 a.m. sharp on Saturday, 10/10/2020. Before your interview, please be sure to study the following rules before arriving and to come prepared. 1. If you arrive by car, you may park on the east lot in any blue space. Do not park in the white or reserved spaces. These are for guests. 2. You will enter through the eastern entrance. An eagle in the bras filigree on the door is correct entrance, should you not notice any signs. 3. If the door is open, walk in and proceed to step 3A. 4. If the door is closed, walk around to the south side entrance marked with a decorative woman and proceed to step 3B. 5. Please bring a printed copy of your resume. A. If you have arrived through the situation described in 2A, hotel staff will be there to greet you. Give the blonde attendant your coat and hat and other personal belongings, if you have either, and deposit any electronic devices on your person into the bin sitting on the accent table beside the mirror. B. If you have arrived through the situation described in 2B, you will be alone. Place your electronic devices, likewise, in a bin on the nearest accent table without a mirror in front of it. Leave your personal belongings, including purses, handbags, backpacks, timekeeping devices, wallets, keys, papers, notebooks, books, pens, pencils, and hats on the chair beside the table. You may proceed with your coat. 6. Proceed to room 002N on the map provided. Please take the time to memorize both routes. You shall not be permitted to speak to staff or guests under any circumstances. A. Do not interact with the staff or diverge from the most direct route possible. 7. When arriving, knock twice. Enter when you hear 2 knocks in return. 8. If you arrived in situation 2A described above, sit in the chair to the left. If you arrived in situation 2B described above, sit in the chair beside the desk of your interviewer. In the unlikely event that all chairs are filled, stand in the left-hand corner. In the unlikely event that there is only one chair, stand in the left-hand corner. 9. If it is only you and the interviewer, you will introduce yourself first with the following phrase. What a swell day it is to be out yonder. Lovely to meet you. I'm, your full name. Hear about the position. If you entered through the situation described in 2B, however, you may introduce yourself as you please. 10. If there is anyone else in the room, you are to wait to be spoken with. If there is a woman in the room wearing green, or a man with a feather in his breast pocket, do not speak to them no matter what they say to you. If there is a woman in the room with a hat, look immediately to the floor and do not look up at him for the remainder of the time he is in the room. If there is a man wearing red in the room, do not confirm your full name throughout the duration of the interview. When asked to speak in this group, the phrase you will say in turn to your interviewer, "It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I am excited for this opportunity to become a part of the Grand's illustrious team." 11. The interview will be conducted at this time. Answer honestly all questions, barring the caveats mentioned above. 12. You are not to leave the room until dismissed. 13. Upon leaving, you will wait for any woman in the room to stand and exit first. Do be sure to stand if they rise from their seats, and return to your seat when finished. If the man with a feather in his breast pocket is in the room, you will wait for him to dismiss you before leaving. 14. When exiting, you will leave through the east side entrance. 15. Discuss this list with no one. We are excited to meet you. Call with any questions or clarifications. The Magnum. I looked through the rules and flipped to the other pages in this packet. There was a map of the parking lot and first floor, contact information, clothing requirements, and an old-fashioned brochure listing benefits, responsibilities, and average salary of a bellboy, which was too good for what I expected to be a minimum wage experience. I think I'm being pranked, I told Brian, letting him read over the rules. Brian laughed and told me to toss it in the garbage or just frame it. It was garbage, yeah, but I knew the only person who would have tailor-made this garbage for me. I was flattered, really. This was pretty elaborate, and I'll admit, very detailed, down to the weathered look of the floor map. I went to text Kat and remembered I still didn't have her cell. I called the landline instead to say thanks for the prank gift. "I didn't send you anything," Kat said, sounding genuinely surprised. I thought it was funny, Kat. The rules list is kind of just dramatic, don't you think? Rules? Kat sounded confused over the phone and then laughed. Oh, right. I forgot how weird they are when you start this job. What? I didn't send you anything, Kat said again. All I did was mention you to my manager, lied a bit and said you had some experience in hospitality. It's not like this job is demanding. He asked for your name and address, and I know you live with Jill's boyfriend, so easy enough. Your name is Jesse Faw, right? Yeah. He sent you a package, right? Lots of weird rules. If it is only you and the interviewer, you will introduce yourself first with the following phrase. What a swell day it is to be out yonder. I read dramatically. Yep, Kat said, laughing a little. You are actually supposed to follow them. Seriously? I'm not going to remember all this trash, I said, not without a checklist or something. Hold on. Kat hung up, and she didn't call back for a few minutes. She didn't call back until the next day. Hey, Jesse, Kat said. So I asked around and I was right. You don't have to worry. It's always the same. The rules are overcomplicated. If you want, I can go over them with you, but essentially, you're supposed to follow the 2B rule set. That's it? Yeah. I felt the biggest weight lift off my chest then, thinking of having an income again. If these people wanted me to sing and tap dance, I'd learn the choreography. Fine. At the end of the day, I'd have the job and it's easier to hire someone than fire them. If this was all just a complicated hazing, fine. I asked Katz exactly what lines I had to follow for my play act of an interview. She started listing them off casually, but then sort of petered off. "If you don't think you'll have it by Saturday," Katz said, a little hesitantly, "I can come over and help you go over it." I grimaced. She was inviting herself over. Kat seemed sweet, and I wanted to think of it as a kind gesture, but this just felt a little too above and beyond. I held the phone to my chest, panicking, looking for Brian to hiss my concerns at, but he was off at the gym. Suggest somewhere public, I thought to myself. How about we talk it over at, the park instead? Tomorrow? When do you get off work? I'm off at 6 tomorrow, actually. It'd be dark by then. There's a coffee house nearby. We could meet at the Green. She agreed, and I hung up, feeling pretty good about relocating it to somewhere impersonal. Brian laughed at me when I told him later, and I realized I probably made it sound like a date. Shit. The not date review of the rules was actually not as bad as I thought it would be. Kat seemed truly eager to get down to business, interviewing what to do and when. She kept the list in her hand and made me recite each step. We ignored all the cafes and kept to the bare necessities of the path she and the other employees went through. And after you leave your stuff in the bin. But the jacket I can take, I chime in. When you get inside the room and sit in the back chair, you'll say, "It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I'm excited for this opportunity to become a part of the grand, illustrious bullshit team." Catherine smiled wide, observing me with wide brown eyes. "You're hired," she teased. I felt pretty right about Saturday. The attire required was another hurdle, but not as bad as the others. Black pants, black shirt with a collar, black shoes, red tie. I had some slacks from my graduation and borrowed the shirt from Brian. Jill and I found a tie for $1 at a thrift store. I took the subway into the city and made it to the Magnum at sometime around 9:50. As Kat had promised, the east entrance was closed, which meant I was going around to the south entrance. The building itself looked like any other hotel I'd seen in the city. Tall, stone structures with filigree and crests that added some extra air of importance to the structure's existence. To add to that, it was right across from the park, but only 4 blocks from a Chipotle. Nothing in the city is above being neighbors with convenient fast food. Before I even got inside, however, everything kind of went sideways. The east side entrance was closed as it was supposed to be, but so was the south side door. The filigree of a woman stared back at me, refusing to budge. This was the south side. This was the door I was supposed to walk through, but I pulled the handle and it didn't open. I knocked and waited. No one came. I rushed immediately back to the east side door, half dreading that it was the open one. If that was the case, I was screwed. I only knew the rules for the B scenarios, but when I tried that door, it was just as locked as the other. The hell? I walked around the street looking for another entrance, but couldn't find one. It was soon 10:05, and I was wondering if something had gone wrong, so I did the only thing I could think of and called Kat. She answered quickly enough. "What do you mean the door's closed?" Kat snapped. "It's Saturday, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is. You were supposed to be here. I saw it on Robert's schedule. Hold on, I'm coming down. Just go to the east side of the building and walk past the door into the alley. There's an employee entrance there. I can let you in. Just wait there." She hung up on me and I practically sprinted back around the wide building. The alley she was talking about was the odd backing to an otherwise opulent building. The walls were flat, the dumpsters crowding both sides and half open, reeking with garbage. Even in the middle of morning, it was dark in that little crack of space. The door Kat mentioned was a bland, gray door that looked severe and functional, completely detached from the gaudy facade that decorated the front. I paced up and down the chipped asphalt, dodging the glass chips and piled of crates. Then the white door opened, and I turned at attention. But it wasn't Kat at the door. "What are you doing back here, kid? You lost?" a man asked. He wore a trim red and black uniform and a little name tag that said Eddie. Instinctively, I would have answered no and babbled about being here for an interview, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be back here. This was the interview script, and if this was my only entrance, I couldn't be shooed away from it. "I'm the new guy. Rob told me to come in this way today," I said, boldly dropping the name I heard Kat use, but I made an awkward gesture toward the door, trying to convey going through and hoping vague complications seemed like an understandable enough barrier. "Oh," he said, seemed to think my uncertainty was warranted. His thin lips pressed together tight, and he gave me an odd kind of look. He may have wanted to say something, but instead quickly shouldered a large garbage bag that had been laid at his feet behind him, and held the door open for me. "Go on then. He's got an interview or something today, so you can wait for him in the break room. 15E. I took the door from him and held it open in turn so he could take the garbage. "Thanks." Eddie nodded. His bag was dripping garbage slime, which is never pleasant, but he didn't seem bothered to have it hauled over his shoulder. When he walked past me, there wasn't the lingering smell of garbage, but there was something like iron. He walked on, and I walked into the hotel, the door closing behind me. I looked down at the polished floor, and there were stains when the garbage bag had been. They were a little ruddy red-brown, like the kind you'd see on a counter or a cutting board after cutting up a steak. Expired meat, I thought to myself. I realized Eddie wouldn't take long to throw out the trash, and I had to be out of sight by the time he arrived to not get caught. I sprinted down the hall, through a few sets of double doors, heading inward to the best of my approximation, hoping to hit a lobby or room number to guide my way. Soon enough, the tile floor turned to green carpet, and the ornate facade was back as I walked into the main rooms. I looked at the first door beside me, 025E. It wasn't where I was supposed to be, but it gave me an idea of where to go. Kat showed me a direct route on the map, so I knew I had to walk to the north wing first, which meant following E's numbers until they dwindled to 1 near the lobby, and then continuing on the way I would have if I entered through the southern entrance. I still had my coat and my phone, but this wasn't unmanageable. I could fake it. First thing first, I had to get rid of my stuff. The hall was ornate, decorated with slim wooden tables and delicate golden electric lighting. There were pieces of ivory, jade, and copper art that looked expensive. I quickly removed my coat and my phone by 011E, and kind of bundled both up and shoved it in a nice, wide porcelain vase. I wasn't about to lose a stupid interview over a technicality. I continued on, half afraid I was already lost until I hit the first wall with a copper bust of some 1800s guy. Kat had mentioned it before. I was in the hall directly behind the lobby and standing directly behind the concierge desk now. All I had to do from here is turn left, or I would have if I was coming from the south side. Now, I just had to keep walking and I'd be there. I'd keep going, turning right at the women's restroom, and then 002N was on the right. As past the bust, 2 chatting women, dressed as staff, rounded the corner and spotted me. When they did, they went dead silent. They didn't slow down, but they stared, jaws falling a little slack at the sight of me. I tried to smile back, but they ducked their heads away and kept walking. One of the girls dropped something. It was heavy enough that they should have been able to hear the dull thud, but they rounded the corner instead of stopping. It was a key. I picked it up, and it was clearly an old-fashioned room key. Not a card for an electric door, but a heavy brass key with a little tag that said 001. I backtracked a little, trying to catch their attention. They'd huddled closer together, walking arm and arm, whispering and giggling to one another. One threw her head back to sneak a glance at the empty hall and looked genuinely surprised to see me. I held the key up, showing her wordlessly what she left. She nodded and tossed her head to the side as if saying, "Get going." But she raised her hand to her lips and turned her back to me, breaking into a run arm in arm with her friend. I turned the key over in my hands. This was the part of the hall I was supposed to walk into. The instructions said I wasn't supposed to talk to staff. Maybe she knew that. Maybe she was one of Kat's friends and was helping me out. Should I have left the key on the ground? Was this a part of this weird hazing? I half debated just leaving it on the floor, but it wasn't my hand anyway. I turned it into the guy at my interview and tell him what happened. Maybe that was the point of it. Finally, I found room 002N. Was where Kat said it'd be. The second to last door in a dead-end hall. The last door, 001, was propped open, slightly ajar. Inside, the lights were off, giving me only a glimpse of the carpet. I knocked twice on 002N, like I was supposed to. "Come in," I heard from the other side of the door. I remained outside, at ease, knowing what Kat and I had rehearsed. "Hey," I said, "come in." The guy on the other side called a little louder. I shifted a little, debating if I should knock again. No, 2 knocks. Kat had even rapped her knuckles against the table when we went over it. I was supposed to wait for 2 knocks. As I waited, I heard another noise just behind me from 001. The door squeaked on its hinges. When I turned, it was a little more open, but I still couldn't see much from my angle. I could hear something inside, though. Something was moving around, scratching against the wall just across from me. I heard a voice like an old man's moan weakly. "Help," he said, his voice sorrowful and cracked. "Somebody help." I don't know what made me weary. Maybe it was something in his voice, desperate and gravelly. Yes, but a little too clear, like it knew I was there to hear it. Some instinctive part of me told me to stay put. Then, the groaning stopped and there was a heavy thud, like a fist pounding the wall. I heard the man inside groan and shuffle again, slowly making his way down the length of the room, closer to the door. I knocked again at 002N. Hey, there's someone here." I called only to be met with no response. The groaning kept getting closer to the door. "Help, Jesse, help." I rushed to door 001, grabbed the handle and slammed it shut. I didn't look inside, but I caught a whiff of the smell. The pungent stench of a sewer on a rainy day came to mind, like something had died and rotted inside. Then, a hand reached out and grabbed my wrist and tugged. I was thrown back against the opposite side of the hall, and there was Kat, pulling the door closed. Room 001 shook as the thing on the opposite side threw its full weight against the door. Kat turned and looked at me, holding her hand out. "The key," she hissed. "The key." My hands were shaking as I fished into my pocket for the brass key. I hardly had it out of my pocket when Kat snatched it away and locked the door. Another powerful bang sent her stumbling back to the opposite side of the hall. It was then I heard 2 calm, controlled knocks behind me. I nearly jumped back to the other side, before suddenly remembering this was 002N, and I was waiting on them. I looked at Kat, who paused, midway through fixing her blouse. Kat pulled me onto my feet and fixed my tie. "Don't worry about that," Kat whispered hastily. "Tell them you locked the door with no one's help. I wasn't here. Go." I practically threw the door open and sprinted in. 3 members of the hotel staff sat inside, all very composed and evidently confused by my heavy breathing and my no doubt priceless expression. "What's the matter, love? You look absolutely shaken," the woman behind the desk asked. I immediately shut my mouth, taking in exactly who was in the room and where. There were 3 people like Kat had warned me, but they weren't. They were more distracting than I expected. Kat told me to expect to see a man in a red vest, and I did since I had stumbled into his chair. What I didn't expect was for him to be badly burned. A nasty, pinkish scar ran up his neck, shriveling his chin, his ear, and his nostrils. One eye was permanently shut and the other was crooked. The other was a woman who stood in the corner. She leaned over the chair next to the man in red, her sunken eyes fixed intensely on me. There's no other word to describe her other than intense. I felt like I was under scrutiny for how I moved, and how loud my steps were as I passed her. She was very tall, so tall she had developed a hunch from years of bending her neck to look down at people. She said nothing to me, but her head turned, tracking me as I went. The last was the woman in green I wasn't supposed to speak to. She was sharply dressed and quite pretty, but was also the one sitting behind the desk where I expected my interviewer to be. I wasn't supposed to speak to her, wasn't I? That was the whole point Kat had drilled into my head. The one I wasn't supposed to worry about was the looming woman who twitched when I took my seat in the chair behind the desk. "Could I get you a glass of water, love?" the woman in green asked sweetly. "You're our 10 o'clock, aren't you, Jessie Faw?" I wasn't allowed to speak to her, wasn't I? Did that include nodding? "He's skinny," the tall one said, buggy eyes still on me. Her pale tongue darted out to lick her lips. "Sticks." "Behave, Lori," the man told the tall woman. "Jessie, this is Lori Belaford, honorary front office manager," he said, nodding to the tall woman. He then gestured to the woman in green. "Frederica Sarde, the general manager of this hotel. And I'm Robert Strauss, chief concierge and hiring manager. You can tell us a little about yourself." It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I'm excited for this opportunity to become a part of the grand... I couldn't remember the stupid word used between this part. "Illustrious team," Frederica supplied. "Close enough, I'd say." The 3 of them chuckled a little. I looked at Robert. "There's something in room 1 that..." Robert held up a hand. "We'll get to that." "Okay." "Did you have any trouble finding the entrance?" Robert asked. No. Someone walked out when I walked in." "At which entrance?" "The east one." "Strange. I was sure both were locked," Robert said, looking dead on at me. He arched a brow, waiting for my input. When I provided none, he continued. "Why'd you lie?" I didn't have any trouble finding the entrance." "Do you know what was in the bag?" Lori asked, her voice pitched high and eager. "What bag?" Robert asked, looking confused. "The bag Eddie had," Lori said. I shook my head, too terrified by her gaze to really reply to her. Robert arched a brow. "You saw Eddie? The janitor?" "For a second," I said hesitantly. Robert and Frederica shared a look, but Frederica smiled. "It is an east side entrance." Robert cleared his throat and moved on. "Then you saw 2 girls drop a key to room 1. Why'd you keep it?" I wasn't going to keep it. I was going to give it to you when I came in, but then... "Room 1, the woman in green supplied. I almost answered in the affirmative and then stopped myself. She smiled wide, amused to nearly catch me. "What did you do?" Robert asked. I closed the door and locked it. That's it? Yeah. Why didn't you go into the room to see who was calling? He asked. I had a bad feeling. And you weren't tempted to look, walk in, just see? Robert asked. That was a test, wasn't it? I asked. Are people supposed to look? If they don't want to be here? Lori said with that wrinkled, over-eager grin. Does she upset you? Frederica asked me suddenly with a wicked grin. As she did, Lori's wrinkled face curled into a frown, and her eyes were still menacing facing me. I wanted to protest, but I'm not supposed to speak to her. I started weighing how much I cared about the rules in a place already as twisted as this. She does, doesn't she? Frederica taunted. Hear that, Lori? He thinks you're disgusting. Lori stopped forward and suddenly was looming over me, and I had nowhere to go but the back of my chair as buggy eyes glared further and further down into me. Then, Robert cleared his throat. That'll be enough, thank you. Lori and Frederica stood, and I stood as well as they both made their exits. I looked to Robert then. What kind of place is this? One that requires discretion, a good sense of memorization and improvisation. I think you'll be a good fit here, Robert said, standing and walking over to the desk. He unlocked a cabinet drawer and pulled out some papers. He then drew a handkerchief and reached up, pulling up a piece of the skin at the top of his forehead. I nearly leapt out of my seat as he started peeling the skin back. Holy. Robert kept pulling until his face was removed, but there was no fleshy muscle beneath, just a regular half of a face. It was makeup. Burn makeup. Excuse me for a moment. The prosthetics itch, but I'd like to make you an offer to sign on with us. It was all makeup? I snap. Part of the interview. The bag Eddie carried was meant to be suspicious, and Joe gets a kick out of scaring the new guys in room 1. See, like I said, this is a job that's unpredictable, and we look for a certain personality type. We try to learn it as quickly as possible. Robert wiped off the rest of the makeup with his handkerchief and looked like a normal man in his mid-40s. Most people break with Lori or forget the rules with Freddie. I looked dumbfounded from the door to him. That's it? That's the interview? Yes. Don't you want to ask me questions? I've learned about everything I need to know from you. The fact that you were able to find us and send a letter of inquiry to us at all is a start to let me know you know what kind of place this is. Following the rules and your reaction to our surprises for you tells me everything else I need to know. What kind of place do you work that you need me to know how I'd react to a bloody bag and a guy moaning from another room? Robert straightened and smiled as if that was a question with the most obvious answer. We're a luxury hotel. Half our job is going about as if it's business as usual, but it's not. There's a lot of protocol to follow, and it requires you to know what to do in a lot of situations. Did you have anyone help you with the rules? No, I say as I rehearsed. I wasn't supposed to show them to anyone else. Also an extreme part of the test. Good, Robert said. If you can't memorize and follow those instructions in the time we gave you, then you wouldn't be able to handle this job. But you were a natural. But you still have enough independence that you're not completely lacking in critical thought. You'll do well here. Listen, after all this, I don't even know if I want this job. Robert didn't say anything. Just showed me the starting salary. This was the walkthrough fire, but I can guarantee, if you sign on with us, so long as you stick to the rules, you'll be fine. The money was good. Really good. The first set of rules wasn't so bad. If this was some weird idea of promoting discretion, then fine. Joe and Eddie were a setup. I could keep my mouth shut. If they'd let me in, and all I had to do was learn a routine, fine. So I took the job. It was better than anything I'd get in a lab, and in that moment things had gone from terrifying to completely lax. I signed a contract there and went home with a set of rules, a schedule, and a signing bonus. I was giddy, waving my check in Brian's face. Jill came by later and I wholeheartedly thanked her too. "Jill, I'm so glad you keep good friends," I said as I tore into the new list of rules. "What do you mean?" "Catherine." "Who?" "Catherine. I still can remember her last name. Your sorority sister? You were sitting with her at your reunion before we arrived." "Oh." Jill nodded. I turned back to my employee contract and pulled out the new list of rules, flipping to the first page. "You mean that blonde girl?" Jill asked. "I only met her that night. I thought she was a friend of yours." Rule 1. Never speak to Catherine. Never give her your name. Well, shit. Ever since I discovered this hobby, I had visited every abandoned place my city had to offer. Factories, schools, warehouses, each one stuck in a moment of undisturbed nostalgia, but never bunkers. They were completely out of my area of expertise, deemed dangerous, and made inaccessible within my area. This is why I had to step out of my comfort zone. I had scheduled a meeting with 3 guys in a metro station in Russia. They called it a quick dive. Go in, learn a little about the place as we walk, see everything there is to see, then go out. No harm done. No one gets in trouble. However, when the time came for us to meet, I found out only one of the 3 spoke English at a level where we could hold a conversation. He was an odd guy who stood with his scarred cheek. To add to the intimidating factor, he also had a thick accent, but the message got across, specifically that he was the guide who would show us to the bunker. "Grigory." He reached out for a handshake. "Follow rule or go home." "Okay." I nodded. There were the rules. Then there was the plan. Well, it was pretty much just helping each other. The bunker had a specific list. He would go into detail later. After that, the other 2 came forward to shake hands as well. A blonde guy named Misha, and a tall one named Kolya. Everyone's backpack seemed well prepared, so there wasn't any issue regarding that. As for our introductions, we kept everything short, prioritizing Grigory's plan with the idea of bonding along the way. "Wait for train. Empty." He gestured at the people around himself, then pointed towards the tunnel as he continued speaking. "Sensor. I go first, okay? I know how not start alarm. Walk. Door 1. No, door 2. He gave a thumbs up, which he also used to point at the ceiling. "Vent." "Got it," I responded. From what I understood, the plan was to wait for the metro train to clear the platform, mainly to avoid any inquiring eyes. Then, we would walk along the rails, sticking to the wall until we passed one worker gate and met the second. Above it would be a ventilation duct that connected to the bunker. It seemed to be the only way. Most importantly, Grigory knew the sensor blind spots, so we were only allowed to step where he did. 5 minutes in, and the train slid to a stop on the rails, screeching back into the darkness of the tunnel not long after. Being the only people left on the platform, the 4 of us quickly descended and trailed behind the train in a half sprint, flashlights in our hands, for another 10 minutes. Everything happened exactly as planned. However, seeing the so-called ventilation duct, I would lie if I said I wasn't feeling apprehensive. It looked to be just a little more than a tight fit, yet that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the sharp turn of the duct, right above the opening. It took a low curse from Misha for Grigory to realize what crossed our minds, so at least we didn't have to discuss who went first. Without another word on our part, Grigory bit into the body of his flashlight and climbed the iron gate. throwing his backpack into the opening while we lit his way. As he squeezed in as well, the duct vibrated a low hum, and only after his body followed into the ventilation duct did he speak. "See this? Goes right. Head first, arms raised, okay?" Grigory narrated his actions, switching between Russian and English. "Go in, rotate right shoulder up, push. No worry, you get stuck, I pull you out." He spoke in a matter of fact and did everything with confidence. It was obvious he had done this before. Having someone reliable was relieving, and it was as if all my worries vanished at that moment. "Come," he ushered twice. The three of us looked at each other. Kolya followed suit in climbing the gates without confirming with us first, and I quickly volunteered as he did. Having someone behind to pull me out rather than further in by going last sounded much better. I climbed the gate as well, and as did Grigory as instructed, holding my arms above my head. Over my backpack, I could spot Kolya wiping the dusty insides with his behind, and once I was in, I was no different. The ducts shook at my every movement and sent dust flying into my nostrils, teaching me how useful a mask would have been. Fortunately, the unpleasantness was short-lived, as I saw the exit shortly thereafter. The one thing that hit me was the stale smell with no hints of burnt. The second, the view. There were flower bouquets by the ventilation ducts, and not just a few. I also noticed crates that had been dug through, most of them blackened by an old pattern. "Fire," Grigory said, his accent especially noticeable. "Everything burned. 1952. 40 dead." 40? I asked, incredulous. Such a number came as a surprise. "Any survivors?" Grigory shook his head. "Zero. Quiet." Afterwards, he took the lead once more, introducing the rules of the bunker. "No loud talk, only quiet talk, okay?" His eyes met mine. I nodded to confirm I understood. Then he continued, using another look to ask for confirmation. "No touch, only look." Finally, just before listing the final rule, he made particularly sure everyone was listening. "One souvenir each, okay? No two, no zero. One." We chuckled at his insistence to take some memories back with us, but didn't think twice. Following this, we strolled through the place, passing by multiple things that hinted at what this place might have been used for. As for what I couldn't figure out, Grigory filled in. Crates with cushions of straws made up most of the depository, with gas masks at ready in every room. New pairs of old-fashioned shoes and simple iron tools were also a frequent find, but they were nowhere near the abundancy of Morse telegraphs and radios connected to bulky headphones. Information, Grigory pointed out, bringing the equipment to our attention. I figured as much. Still unsure of the whole picture, I asked, "What kind of information?" "Anything. Enemy number, enemy weapon, tank, you know," Grigory continued. I nodded along, Grigory's voice replaying in my head. It was a completely different experience having this piece of history before me than having it recounted. I wanted to find out more, what they felt like, what they sounded like. While everyone lit the area ahead of us, I stepped out of the group and took a seat beside the radio. The wooden chair creaked under my weight, and immediately, everyone's flashlights pointed to my location. Just knowing some important figure who had a say in the war had a seat on this chair and replied on the equipment within my reach was an incredible feeling. Sadly, I was discovered before I could probe the radio, so I could only return a pleading look to Grigory. Well, suffice to say, Grigory did not share my joy. "No touch," he scolded. "You want chair souvenir?" I swallowed a laugh at the unintended humor, replying honestly, "Sorry, my bad. Touch souvenir only." My little stunt affected him somehow, because after that he seemed stressed. The frown wouldn't leave his brows. And not only that, just the way he looked around made me feel uneasy. He also kept a closer eye on us. Soon, we arrived by a room that didn't fit the other's theme. Spots of many hues of red stuck to the concrete. Wooden contraptions I couldn't put a name to, similarly stained. Everything in this room seemed tortured and carried a different weight to it. Torture room for spy and thief. See? Grigory pointed at a particularly lighter stain. Took 3 souvenir. Kolya and Misha laughed at the absurdity of his words. The joke came out of nowhere, so of course I laughed as well. Grigory, however, didn't seem in the mood. In fact, I hadn't seen him smile the entire trip. 1 each, he repeated. His stern expression even looked us down. And with our confirmation came confusion. Yeah, but why? I asked. The other 2 understood what was going on and focused on the conversation as well. In turn, Grigory clicked his tongue. His only response was to point around the torture room, some Russian words aiding his explanation. It was obvious the other 2 weren't buying it. They either raised an eyebrow or chuckled at whatever he had said. As for me, he only had 2 words to share, 1 each. He was definitely frustrated he couldn't put his worries into words, whatever they were. Being my first bunker, I wasn't planning on being too rebellious, but I can't deny it would have helped knowing more about the situation, perhaps to shoulder a little of the burden because Grigory looked far from well. Okay, done, he stated. Take souvenir, 1 each. The end came much too sudden. The place wasn't big, but definitely had a lot of picks. On our way back, Misha chose a gas mask, while Kolya picked a simple knife from an open crate. It was a hard choice for me, but in the end, I took one of the Morse telegraphs. Though, surprisingly, I didn't see Grigory take anything. He spent the entire time carefully monitoring us. Still, back at the ventilation duct room, it came as a surprise to see him block the ventilation duct. Open, Grigory ordered, pointing at my backpack. I looked at Misha and Kolya, who were just as confused, but more than that, fidgety. I didn't see the point in starting an argument, so I went along with Grigory's demand, dropping my backpack on the concrete and unzipping it to reveal its contents. Grigory pointed his flashlight inside and nodded after a quick look, stepping to the side to let me enter the ventilation. I agreed to go first, exchanging a look with the 3. I could feel the conflict that was about to erupt, and I hoped the silent plea in my eyes would have helped somehow since I had no words that could have diffused the situation. I remember pushing my backpack in first while biting onto my flashlight and puffing dust, using my palms to pull myself along. Not long after, my flashlight started acting up, and when it lost power altogether, I could no longer tell left from right. When I finally came to, it felt as if a single second passed. But it was enough to turn the neutral situation horrifying. I was seeing the torture room from a seated angle while leather belts dug into my flesh. My everything from head to toe was bound. Then, I saw them behind a glass pane, in full view of the flashlight by my feet. A group of corpses in military uniforms, charred skins glowing like magma, and clouded eyes inspecting me. Grigory? I shouted. Shh, quiet. No worry. He quietly answered as if to comfort me. How the fuck can I not worry? Dude, are you seeing this? Where are Misha and Kolya? I responded. No. Late, Misha, Kolya, thief. No worry. Quiet. Trust Grigory. You good. No worry. Close eye. No worry. He continued almost in a whisper, and wouldn't stop repeating it. He kept repeating the same thing until I finally calmed down the slightest bit. He He wouldn't have told me what to do for no reason, so I decided to trust him despite my feelings of being wronged. I wanted to scream, demand who my captors were, what they wanted, but Gregory seemed to know what was best. I heard a door slam, then I heard steps. I did as Gregory advised and closed my eyes, but not knowing what was coming and when made it much worse. My skin turned cold. I was shivering, yet the steps wouldn't stop drawing closer. I was moments away from hyperventilating when they finally passed by me, leaving an intense smell of rot and death in their wake. And right before they stopped, Misha screamed. He cursed and called for Grigory. No answer came, so Kolya responded instead, panic unmistakable in his voice. Then they called my name. My lips parted, yet I couldn't utter a single word. Since Grigory didn't do it, I didn't do it. He asked me to trust him. This trust and reliance were everything I had in the situation. Despite our unwillingness to talk, Misha had already heard us. He knew we were there, and when a crunch resounded and his screams turned pained, his voice became filled with hatred. He called our names, frustrated and angry that we weren't sharing his suffering. I was sure that was the reason. I finally understood what Grigory meant by calling them thieves. The stains of blood inside the torture room. Grigory knew everything. I needed answers, but I was in no position to ask. A metallic clank warned me from behind not to let my tongue loose. Kolya also caught on to something and tried to follow our example, becoming quiet and ignoring Misha, and Misha realized. He had been singled out and knew he couldn't rely on us anymore. The metallic clanks became louder and louder in a tease of what was coming next. He no longer had the time to curse us. His tone, he begged, cried, asked for mercy from whatever was hurting him, though it didn't seem to work. As his voice raised in panic, he screamed once more in fear, and when the metallic clank sounded again, another time in pain, I could feel his scream vibrate my guts. I'm sure the others felt it to some degree as well, but no one dared break the silence. I was certain at that moment that Misha would die, yet I only thought of Kolya. The false feeling of safety he must have felt at that moment. Knowing he would be second was a painful guilt. It was worse than Misha's fate. He would witness his treatment firsthand while hoping otherwise, only to be proven wrong as he goes through perhaps the same torture, step by step. From that moment, Misha's screams could only lose strength. His lungs had already been abused beyond their ability. A hollow strike turned his labored breaths into gurgles, and spitting might have been what brought his salvation. A quick end. Another strike followed, louder, then another, until the only strikes were the drops of liquid on concrete, a suffocating silence pausing in between. I shed a tear. Grigory whimpered. Kolya sniffled, and the creature, it walked again, going further behind me. It was finally Kolya's turn. His cries contained no trace of fear, but regret. He asked things of Grigory, crying betrayal at every clank. He blamed him for every strike and shred of pain, all the way to his death. He blamed him not in anger, but betrayal, and by the time Kolya took his last breath, Grigory could no longer hold back from crying. I couldn't either. The creature stepped, this time towards me. It stopped in front of me and my heart slowed, hoping I would turn invisible. I could feel its intimidating presence. I could smell it, the stale current it cast with its movements brushing against me, the same current I felt before its rotten. Bony hand struck my cheek with all its strength, almost knocking down the chair I was bound to. Bits of exposed bone left on my face, a cut oozing blood, and a pulsating sensation that turned the world around me. Yet, I still didn't dare open my eyes. My cries were stuck in my throat, and while I braced myself for another strike, it had actually turned and left, headed for Grigory. I was alive. It had spared me. I was expecting it to hurt Grigory in some way as well, but I heard nothing else after it stopped moving. It stood somewhere near Grigory, watching him, only for moments later to sigh a deathly whistle that echoed by my ears and disappeared into the walls. The leather belts vanished as if they had never been there in the first place, sending me to my knees. I couldn't feel those things staring at me anymore. My stuffed breaths rushed out by themselves. Grigory's cries clearer than ever after drying myself of adrenaline. I dreaded the idea of turning, seeing the bodies of Misha and Kolya. I had witnessed their deaths, and I was afraid of seeing what became of them. But that was just delaying the inevitable. Despite my shaken state, I still felt my hands wander the concrete, first finding my backpack. Then I picked the flashlight by my chair and lit Grigory's face. His still closed eyes, one of which purple, and the scarred cheek that matched mine. In the corner of my light, I saw the pool of blood where Kolya should have been. The wooden chair still sucked on every drop it caught while its legs bathed in the crimson liquid. But there was no Kolya. My light slowly slid across the wall to Misha's chair, and I found out it was no different there. "Grigory?" I cried. Receiving no response, I called his name again, bringing the light to his face. In turn, he only gently shook his head. The walls felt like pairs of eyes watching my every movement now. I dreaded standing up, even taking a single step in fear of doing something I shouldn't, but still sought the comfort of Grigory's presence. Grigory, he wasn't afraid. Rather, he regretted the situation. After an effort to arrive by his side, I placed a hand on his shoulder and let him pick himself up. Similarly, he grabbed the flashlight by his feet and slowly walked along with me, silently crying. As we crossed the equipment-filled room, I reached into my backpack and retrieved the Morse telegraph, trying to return it. "No, take nothing. Spy, take 2. Thief," he warned. Again, my heart climbed to my throat. I was stuck with a cursed souvenir, unable to dispose of it. I feared even asking if I could rid myself of it after leaving, convinced the walls were listening. Everything about the bunker felt claustrophobic now. Won't we get in trouble? 2 people died here. We've already been seen together. We can't explain this, I realized. No. He didn't go into detail, but stopped me by the ventilation duct, where the flower bouquets laid. There, crouched beside one and picked its card. 1920 to 1952. I didn't get where he was going with this until he read the name. Kolya. Then he reached for another one. 1920 to 1952. Misha. Kolya. Misha. No remember. No exist. No trouble. Felt sick. These bouquets, such a disgusting gesture. The guilt in his voice was genuine, but I didn't understand the drive to bring people to their deaths. Why bring us here? He picked a third card and read it aloud before showing its crossed Russian contents to me. 1920. Grigory. I was taken aback by hearing his name, but no amount of shock could have prepared me for the 4th card, nor for his voice reading my name. I felt Misha's anger many-fold, and a betrayal similar to what Kolya must have felt. 1920. Edgar. Sorry. I suppose anyone would say that the car accident that killed their wife was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Like her or not, it's dreadful. But for me, that day truly was the most terrible one I've ever lived. It's like it sent shockwaves throughout the rest of my future. I can still feel them now, and the impact they've had on my life. My children were in the car too. My 9-year-old daughter, Martha, and my 7-year-old son, Dorian. They screamed for me as I crawled out of my seat. Guttural, terrified screams I would hear in my sleep for years. Fire had started near our mangled car. I knew I didn't have long. I could get one of them out safely. Both were risky. I began to choose. That's where the problem started. I know how terrible that sounds. Trust me, I've hated myself for it since. But I actually considered which one of my children I'd rather save. Martha was my first thought. I didn't have a favorite child exactly, but she was a miracle baby, and one we were told we could never have. The one who had fought so hard to be here. I had the decency to feel terrible about those thoughts and just decided to risk it. I grabbed both of them and ran. Dorian wouldn't talk afterwards. My mother said it was only natural. He was young. The accident was traumatic. He lost his mother, for God's sake. She convinced me to send him to a child psychologist. I don't know exactly what went on in there. She just said he wouldn't talk. That he just sat staring at the wall and hitting his knee. He drew often. Always the same picture. Me, him, Martha, and his mother. But he always drew himself away from us, smaller than the rest of us. Sometimes when we got home, he'd pick up one of the drawings and scribble me out with a black crayon, looking at me right in the eyes as he did it. It was like Dorian knew what I'd thought that day, like he knew I'd almost let him die. His attitude towards me changed. He'd fight to get out of my arms, drawing blood occasionally in a way a child of his age shouldn't have been able to do. He'd throw things, break glass, and leave it when I walked barefoot. I'd wake up some nights feeling watched, to find him standing at the end of my bed. I couldn't move when he did that. I couldn't even talk. And then he'd turn away, go back to bed, and the sensation would go with him. Dorian took it out on Martha too. Her toys would turn up broken. Her homework would go missing. She would wake up with bruises and bite marks. I tried not to shout at him, but that was too far. He took it silently, and when I left him in timeout, I swear I could feel his eyes burning into me. It was more than just a feeling. If I checked, I would find burn marks on my back. After a while, I stopped looking. It sounds ridiculous to say it. He was only 7 after all, but a part of me was terrified of what he could do. It was like an instinct. I didn't always know that when bad things happened, it was Dorian's fault, but I felt it. I tried to make it right, to talk to him, to help, but he'd always turn away and things would only get worse. A few weeks before Dorian's 8th birthday, I woke up in the middle of the night. Goosebumps prickled my skin, even though it was a summer's night. My bedroom seemed darker than usual and more oppressive somehow. My blanket was wrapped tightly around me like a vice. In the seconds it took for me to come around fully, I noticed that it was 3 a.m. on the dot. There was a noise coming from down the hall, a repetitive thumping. It was consistent, not even a pause. It sounded like a trapped animal or something similar. Hauling myself out of bed, I figured I had better go and investigate, if only to put the poor thing out of its misery. Our house was old, and you pretty much could not walk anywhere without the floorboards creaking. There was one in particular on the landing that was obnoxiously loud. Usually, I avoided it like the plague, but with vestiges of a deep sleep still clouding my mind, I stepped on it. The thumping noise stopped immediately. I paused, hardly daring to breathe. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as my eyes fell on Martha's bedroom door. It was ajar, and from inside, there was a small whimper, like a dying animal giving one last cry for help. I moved slowly towards her bedroom, hoping that I was just hearing things, but as I got closer, I heard something that froze me where I stood. Running footsteps, light as a child's, and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I threw the door open and clicked on the light. The scene I found was seared on my brain for hours afterwards, days even. I would replay it over and over again as I spoke to the police, as I cried on my mother's shoulder. Martha's bed sheets were in disarray, like she'd left them in a hurry. The window was wide open, letting in a wind that blew her curtains violently around. There was blood everywhere. A massive pool of it lay at the foot of her bed, and splatters had caught the duvet, the walls, the ceilings, everything. When I screamed, it didn't even sound human. I ran across to Dorian's room and opened his door in a rush, but a part of me knew he wouldn't be in there. He was gone, vanished with nothing but the clothes on his back and his sister's body. The police didn't believe that he'd done it. Why would they? He was only 7. Kids his age can't even walk themselves to school. But they'd never seen the look in my son's eyes, the burning hatred, the power that I didn't understand, lying dormant until he felt ready to use it. I'd seen it the day I'd saved him from the wreck of our car. He had read my mind. He knew what I'd almost done. I'll never truly know what Dorian is capable of or why, but I have a horrible feeling that someday I'll find out. I went to prison for my daughter's murder, as I knew I would. Felt like I deserved it anyway. I should have saved her while I had the chance. The police found her in the woods 6 miles from our house. I never saw the body, but rumor has it one of the police officers was sick at the sight of it. Another quit a week later. That was years ago now. I'm out and far away from the town where I raised my children. No one has seen Dorian since that night. The police found nothing but a trail of dead deer a few feet from Martha's body. They chalked it up to another animal. I knew it was something far more dangerous. He'll be back soon. I have no doubt about that. I haven't seen him, but I've heard things. The thumping from that night. I hear it outside my bedroom window sometimes. Bump, bump, bump. No pause, no break. Just the occasional whimper. The morning after, there's always a body on my doorstep. It's only been animals so far, but I'm not a fool. He's still angry. With a kid like him, the anger only grows. It'll be me out there one day. Mark my words.